Okay, thank you. I want to say good evening, everyone. And I'm so happy we met again. We're discussing about Dharma.
Very fortunate.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. Yeah, we're discussing Dharma. Yeah. When my English finished.
Thank you for teaching. Thank you for teaching.
Teaching.
Thank you for teaching.
Thank you.
So much.
Tashi Fuki Geshe Metal Tram Real Lingxi Yinde Empadi Sangye Shindu Mite Huai Dragon Nanda Shinla Jipasho Hidam Guru Ratnamandala Kamniyatayami Sangye Shidam Zaki Chognam Nam Jongshu Baju Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Shinyen Gipe Zonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Shidam Zaki Chognam Nam Jongshu Baju Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Shinyen Gipe Zonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Shidam Zaki Chognam Nam Jongshu Baju Dakni Gyapsuchi Daki Shinyen Gipe Zonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupasho.
Thank you so much, chanting master. Good chanting master.
I'm the chanting master for the chanting master.
Yeah, good voice. Okay, then today we're discussing maybe 3 steps. this last week we discussed recognize both, recognize all being as mother, then prepare for their kindness. Then today we will be going almost 3 steps. Then wishing to repay their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness. Then loving kindness, must take it so. You want each other, you want
loving kindness.
Loving kindness, then maybe also is great compassion, great compassion. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That is the song that that's Simje Tamje, that Rangi Manchuni, that do to number that somebody did it Tangra, that Lansanda do to a Marina, de la Yansian said that a complete day, Cassinja on the show and I said, Junjuna Sumbashi Sangiani, come now, Laura, maybe when they kind of human Sumba Najeta, come control in Lela Dread is a tending inside Mazola Yamume in the songs that Simje Tamja Rangi Marching you must let have a good day. Dijelata, Simje Tamja Rangi Maimba, my genuine Sovaina, that Simje Tamja Sosola Katinchamo Kazi, Soso Amadi Sosola Katinchamo in Banashi, Simje Tamja Sosola Katinchamo. The Katinchamo Yimbas and Digumare, Konga Pento, the Lavas and Digumare, that Pentona, but Tinepa Joe, yes, in the Pena Jitem. That Namju get a Jitembi Kayuna Tawayana. Any Kujing Alabu pen to a Lana, made possibly the Nadevayana, or Kongalaya would pen to the Nicola Pachi or that Jitembi Kayuna Yovanashi, and Chugi to Nation, Hachanja, Senero, Kadinchabo Yibayana, that Kadinchabo Tilendipa, Tinso Chiboy, Senero, Matinishas and trains and Telemazo, and cutting Tembutoneta, cutting the Yeta.
So we have been practicing about establishing the logic that all sentient beings have been our mothers in our previous lifetime, and we did our best to really find this establishing a logic for that. And once we really established that view and that attitude that all sentient beings are mothers, and we have been doing meditation, you also, for that training, we really have to meditate, get familiar with this, and as Shantideva mentioned, that once you start practicing constantly, nothing is impossible. You can, once you become familiar with the subject, it's no longer difficult and unfamiliar to you. So we take that advice and really constantly meditate and establishing this attitude about all sentient beings, being our mothers. And once you establish that attitude, and then you naturally have to think about how kind they are to us. And even kind of a secular life, an ordinary life, when we are giving favors, when we have been treated kindly by other people, and it's our natural instinct to really do something good in return, what we call payback. And we do that in our daily life. So when we're talking about this Dharma practice, this is even a very important step to once you realize that all sentient beings have been your mothers. And the next thing is really they're very kind to us. And then the next thing is how can we pay back their kindness? And so in this particular session, we're going to talk about how can we pay back to the kind mother sentient beings.
Oh, this is one that the so cutting simple terms de rangla cutting race in cutting chamber race in a tension race, tension to down the lion, and negative tension to down chedan, and the third tension to down each and tell about Chilean part tin so and negative one tin so down chedan, 안 타도 주고는 진소다 이 공부하시 다 내가 주고는 진소단데 다 코로나라 야부치에 콜라 유편주다 딘데지 토네다 뭐 유토네 로로 제바이나 다디 다 진소와 뭐마디 자기 요소 말이야 배나 공알라 편토데 땅만 유춤고 차데 콜라니 로버치기 라와이나 다 돌로 빌렌지 제바이나 콜라 나이 큐니오 말에 다 딜라마 차고 숙청보지 다 돌로 빌렌지에 바이나 딩알라 빌렌이고 되네 코유 대화라 차네 되네 콜라 고 딜렌지 딱도 좀 어떻게 했으니로 내가 더 편도도 보거래 이나야다 털두기다 딜렌지 좀 어떻게 다음도 간에서 털두기 딜렌지에 심제 대다 탐제로 아니 컬러다 소소이 믹메베다 로아나시레 로 믹메베 로아나시다 로바메나 파도 드로마투가 이나야다 딩산다 도도 장다티니 종이 되는도 이나야다 믹메베 로아디 소소이 강조사들 딱달레 마토 뭐 되는지 공부하지 심제 탐제 되는데시 아스네로 다 대섬이 뭐마세 이모마세 되네 심제 탐제다 영어 도숨주 온기로 아니 미시베 온이 영어 도숨주 온기다 기위 미제비초라 주바데 슈크청보체 기위 차발라 주바데 뉴뉴슈고레샤 아스네로 이 가르세나 심제 모라닝원에다 데네 첸도요 마이나야다 영어 도숨주 꾸네라네 다네 미제비초라 주바데 슈크청보슈체 기위초라 주바데 슈크청보슈고레샤 아스네 대zam마이바 아니 미시베 온기다 두바게야다 딘데게야다 kuwe dewa, nega bi dewa la chak de dine mungu shibu do senerwa. Dinde sonzang, dinde bi kuwe dewa la chak de ta, soso yeta nyam taba simche dine o to me shibu ngi dine chi yodo sen. Ha koji koji, ta tungi dine shagna, zawa nini miti warewa. Ten sang, dinde bi simche tamche ta, kowa le tarbadi, ngarana chi yin sene, o dine chi samlo tango sare sene.
So when we think about this repayment, repaying the kindness of sentient being, do you remember before we talked about there is always a short-term repayment and then the long-term repayment. And so even kind of in our ordinary life, when we try to pay back someone's kindness, there's always this kind of instant payment of giving them a cash, giving them a wealth, and giving them other kind of worldly materials. And these are considered as a short-term repayment. But they are really a genuine repayment. The number of reasons, because the short-term repayment really doesn't last, doesn't bring the genuine happiness. In contrary, it really brings further problem. For example, if you give someone $1 billion and you create a number of problems with that, you create this attachment. The person totally get attached to this $1 billion you just get. So it creates a lot of problem. And there's no guarantee of giving them a happiness without money. And in some sense, it's really cause more harm. So when we, although we wanted to do something good for this life, and when we try to do so, if we're not careful, although we have a good intention of giving them some favor, but in certain circumstances, it harms them more. So we have to be careful even short-term benefit we're paying back. And then for a Dharma practitioner, what we are talking about here, the repaying as a long-term repayment. And we have to see that the sentient beings, just like a blind people who cannot see without the help from other people. And this blindness is caused by this affliction or the ignorance. And this ignorance and affliction causing them to confuse between what is a virtual and what is non-virtual action. And as a result, they constantly trip from suffering to suffering. And so when we're seeing that these sentient beings, because of their affliction, because of their ignorance, and constantly producing causes for unhappiness, And seeing that and yet not doing anything, it's really not correct. Therefore, in a very kind of ordinary sense, when someone's going to the wrong direction or harming himself, our natural reaction would be go there and help them. And this is the case with the spiritual practices, knowing that these sentient beings are going from suffering to suffering, not seeing the proper way, and if we don't do something about it, it's not correct. Therefore, from a practitioner's point of view, we have the determination that these people are blinded by their affliction, and we're going to really help them to get enlightenment, to get liberation. And this is what we're talking about, repayment in this context.
뛰어나면서 자원이 되게 미쳤어요. 코알레 털비 탑장 아니 겨워치면 온도 받으면 고반도에 탑되었다. 미저워줄라 미주바라와 미저워줄라 주바디 바까니 겨워줄라 주바디 소파주 아니 겨워들 미제에 남세디 파라주시 아니 레귤리 남세라주시 아니 랑도르기네 랑제도 도제니 파라주체네로 아니 털비 표현다 아니 코르위 님이로 코르위 님이게 하마고는 타바라 주도유로 게임 말에 타바라 주도유로면은 아니 예종면은 타바라 주도유로 게임 말에 다 예종께라 되네 코에 대화텔라다 셴바지 로고 근데 송상 된다고 심지 탐졌다 된다고 랑가라 튀기 나라 치에바디 나라라 치기니 센데 삼로지 된대지 땅투바 이바이나 아니 로디 된대지 공부하이나 다 심지 탐지기 튀기 수바 인사레스 튀소와디 되는 인사레스.
So, if you see the sentient beings are still wandering in samsara because of their ignorance, because of their affliction, and this is the status of the sentient beings. And so, we are here in terms of thinking about the repaying their kindness to really help them. Almost like helping to leave the samsara, show them the way of the, nirvana and liberation. And so the determination here we try to establish is that we will show them what is a virtue or the wholesome, and what is the non-virtue, the unwholesome action. And we show them how the cause and effect works. And by showing them how cause and effect works, then they would know how to choose what is the proper way and what is not. And then we also show them the benefit of liberation. And we also show them the fault of the samsara. Because if we do not show them the fault of the samsara, they would not have the determination to leave the samsara. And through this kind of teaching, we can really give them the ultimate benefit, the ultimate repayment. And so for that, we have to train ourselves to repaying the kindness of the sentient being in terms of showing the correct path.
dungal dubiye gyude soso yi dugore dewa dubiye gyude soso yi dugore sine suchela di yala dresa da de yo mare sine ina yanta drowa simje tamje ta dewa dewa da dungal me dewa chiksung re sine ta dewa dubiye gyuda mijo dubiye gyude soso sebadi tena yaga chena soso la rale dere ani duwa chena soso la rale dewa de pena chujuna la ta shande dewa karna dani we yi dani dani sumara soso gi da tabada tunje koban 토비기 다 규디에 소소 라발라 라레데레 그러 아니 코알라 드에기다 연소 숨라 뺏겨와이 규디에나 소소 라발라 예상 아니 심제 탐제다 미시보군지 제발에 뭐도 신기다 동물지 규두냐 수지요 말해서 다 미시보군지 제발에 미시바데 소레잖아 티무 마리바다 덴지 다 이제 두다 보마 단다 tenjuwe sumba yena ta denzi chadeyo re sene. O ta denzi panye tundala, mato denzi panye tundala tso, 다 이게 동반일라서에 단다 라시기 마주바디 공부에 있는 라시기 마주바 지고기 산지에 고마 토베 내와 있어요. 다 라시기 마주바디 공비체는 때는 자주기 셈 탑시 순의 유토네 다 산지에 고마 두고래 마도 안 자주기 셈 매베토네 아니 동반이 고바 섬게 산지에 고마 루통 말에 아니 자주기 셈 여바치 아니 동반일라서에 따와 동이투비 셰르 매나야 아니 자주 걸 산지에 고마 두마토바래 다 동안 이거로라 대인자 동안이게로라 가시 숨고래 내가지 로라 찬주지 셈 로종 마체는 아지 로라 상진이 요 숨게 dinde요리나야 따디 배제 다 가로다 노디쇼가 있어요 하이선의 제일 부지 가르스면 쓰는 거게 연대시 요만 나로라 투모 남자 너도 규바나 송으로와 투모요 남 너도 규고 되나 안 신에 콜라 나지 도마도 대치고래 송도 알아 대인자 투모 남자 투모에 파진 택버송으로 파진 택버로다 잔주기 쌤다 예중다 디수기 돌아 고아 마셔봐야나 람상하게 동가 제바인 바이나 되네 또 자꾸 못 차기 요사래 했으네로 디인바야 뱉잖아 이만이 되는 거 빼지 샤야는 이마에 열라마지 미들라 로숨 알레리니 추사로 로숨 추순데 캐라 내절미 고반 투브렐라 아니 김에디 베타레 와지 나라 최대나 통용 저래 와지 디 숨소 알레 라마지 다 수에나 하고도 라마지 다 캐라
니자르 뭐만 숨거 캐지 니자르
캐선치가 수에 말아
영만
알레 니들셔도 왔다 캐라 수에나 다 요람데 드레라 탑시 시기로 와세네로 다 요람 드레라 가르치고 아니 캐란다 로숨치 초숨되지 캐라 nen저로만 차기래 했으니 어디에 숨도 알라만데 안디 깨메디 이게 상불에 단다 도저 커뮤니티에 봐 보일라 대제 헥터 페이지 드로잉으로 도저 파몰라 이게 대신에 뭐란 로숨 초숨데 안디 제라타 카이선나 도지 톨라 잠바메 바인자 나지 톨라 남자 가고 있는 거로와 뒤에서 보나 로숨 초숨 산에 셈데투 아니 최대한 원하다 따래 봐지스세 안디 레션 드로잉 알아 통이 가르쳐 버렸으나 뭐 로숨 초숨 되는 달라마데 dinner라고 땅한 내셔만 차버려 했어요. 그 dinner 칭이 dinner 도와서 사서 마시나 나기 도바디 레로요 말해서 된다. 도지 톨라 잠바 차니. 나기 톨라 네베 자워로 뭐 당보랑 나기 톨라 치와 있나? 되네. 고통만 남자 제로 저 somebody get 했어. 된다. 장주기 심디 매도 미로 동안 이걸로 매도 미로 와니자 땅아서 단다. 장주기 심 줘야다. 답지체 쏘고 뒤된다 이 말이에요.
So we really look at the ignorance as being the root cause of samsara. All the sentient beings are going through suffering, and they are blinded. They cannot see the proper way of how things working because of the ignorance. And so then people say, where does this ignorance come from? This ignorance comes from for the prasangikas through self-grasping, and for other schools through not knowing the proper way of things and phenomena. And if you look, all sentient beings desire happiness. All sentient beings want to avoid suffering. Yet they're all experiencing suffering all the time. And why does this? What caused this suffering? It's because this self-grasping, this ignorance, the mistaken view, the wrong view, that really causes the suffering. And for that reason, you have to understand the emptiness and to see the things that not intrinsically exist. And that's very important. And then you combine both the wisdom and the method, and that's where where it's so important to practice Bodhichitta for enlightenment. Is you really have to have the both for a full enlightenment. And some people say, oh, for liberation, especially in the tantra, some of the tantra practitioners, they say you do not need to practice Bodhichitta. If you realize emptiness, you'll gain full enlightenment. But this is not the case for especially the Lama Tsongkhapa's view. And in his teaching, he talked about how it's really important to engage the common practices first. And once you fully mastered and realized the common practices, then you engage in the uncommon practices, including the Tantra and so on. This is because I'll tell you a story. I might have told you before, quite a while ago, in Nepal, there was this Western woman who wanted to have a speedy enlightenment. And so she went to see a Tibetan Lama and said, I really will do anything to get an instant enlightenment. He said, that's fine, you receive a Vajrayogini initiation and do a 3-year retreat, and you will be enlightened. So that's all she did. She received initiation, sitting in the cave, and doing the recitation. And after 3 years, she got this dreadlock hairs, and then she coming out of the retreat and saying that I'm already fully enlightened now, and walking the street, and you can see it was so obvious that she has all this thick dreadlock hair. But then I think you realize that how important it is for the common practices first, because even I think Shantideva mentioned before, as well as other lamas, for a full enlightenment, you have to engage both in the wisdom as well as the method. And because without the method, and if you try to instantly go into Tantra, there will be a number of problems. And in all teachings, the great masters, they talk about the importance of practicing Bodhichitta and the other common practices, and then going into engaging in the practice of Tantra.
tardugi tindi sogu udumado negabji tindi pingimido negabji tenchewaina tandu droasimje tamje kobe dewa negabi dewa la charni khoale tarebi tabegi takoran ralim doasene tenzamaso tardugi dewadi sogoda gemigi namshada landurgi nedanta ta nyejonda chansam nyandabe tawatu soji ta landa chituwa imbaina tiedi narana chigi yesini samlodi jongtuwa imbaina ta chinsodi chinsolangi de legi sare senero lodi jongba dingazo mazo da chala tewa nesi de mazo semporan geshe tan ro loji de jongba de ta nyaba ta ta nyeso na ta gyunje menga tungi ta chinsolan lodi anjole keba sare senero.
So we cannot just do with repaying their kindness with a short-term benefit. And as I mentioned before, the short-term benefit sometimes create more problem to them by creating attachment to samsara. Once you strongly attach to samsara, you will not have the determination to leave it. So you actually create more problem. Therefore, when we think about the repayment of the kindness, we have to look at the ultimate benefit that we can give to the sentient beings. And as we practice and transform our mind into this constantly by going through training, and then almost like the measure of the training is by the time you're getting this genuine feeling that I wanted to repay their kindness by really helping them to get full enlightenment. When you have that feeling, then is a sign of your getting this understanding of the repaying kindness.
네, 다 갑도 맞다. 심지 탐지 이 진소된 아란 진이 있으니까 또또도 얘기를 삼나로. 이나야 푸드니 밀럽나다 심지 탐다 윤제 명아 둔기다. 진소라인 로디 당아도 좀 많이 많이요 말했으니로. 배나서 동바 림베가라 남아도 킹기에다는 예중 부스지 깨워했으니로. 예중 부스기에라디 예중 남다 가고 싶어를 디가라. 예중 부스지 마케 보인바이나 동바디 미토바인자 예중 부스기에나 칸데칸데 레즈는 거. 라마도지 마 디시지 제기 도와스니. 단단가서다 단다 돌린체 베카블라야 심제 탐지기 팀 소고레스는 아직 나라나 지기 인생에 삼로다. 또도 레이를 이나야 딱 무투니 거두이나다 생기기 가서 지금 레기 도와스니. 때는 파마기 뿌를 재워주거나시 랑시 김세 삼로 주는 땅 먹는 거네. 내일 생기기 레바 인바이나 독도 메바지 레바 인바이나 아니 다 이게 균제명아 둥기 보네 둥기 낭네다 진솔 와라야디 다 그러다 chenso with Angela gave it said it does inside this and the songs are Tandamaso Kamani Ringalata, and the chenso that was simply the Dungal in Nade, Dungi and Nawadi, that he get Korani Dungal Tabi Tabdi, Narara Chigi needs any Tambo Dungachi Simjapa, color the Yamtawa de Samrojitam, or Dizoti Mara, Chenamoto Tawan in Disama, yes, and but do you know Tongi? 콜라마로 보마지나 다 잡주비슈 차와라 리타원이 지된다 미팅바로 대인상 소소 되는 동마지 있으면 가수의 냠타버지 삼로지다 다디 트는 제소와디 나라 마치나 딕사 말이에요 선니 삼로마서 까만이도 되지 삼로지 땅이 있으니까
and so when we get this genuine feeling that I'm going to help the sentient beings to attain enlightenment, and this is what we are trying to generate here. And so when we were studying in London and in the section on the renunciation, the lamas would say, first you really have to get in some kind of artificial renunciation and to get the genuine. And so they really create and make attempt to produce this, at least this artificial renunciation to get closer to a genuine renunciation. Especially when you receive a bodhisattva vow or the moksha vow, you really have to get some kind of the renunciation from the samsara, and you do so by really making this artificial effort. But here, this is very different. When we try to generate a genuine kind of a feeling toward the sentient being to repair their kindness by really helping them to get an ultimate benefit, which is to liberate from samsara. And for this, it cannot be an artificial really feeling. You have to have a very genuine, strong feeling that you are going to enable them to get a liberation by means of repairing your the kindness. And so the important thing here is there are two important things you have to think about. First thing is a genuine kind of a desire to find them an ultimate liberation. The second is like, I will do that. I will really make the full commitment to enable the sentient beings to get liberation. So there are two important points you have to do that, and we're going to do a 2-minute meditation on that to really generate this. And once you constantly meditate on that and you're getting familiar, and then when you get that genuine feeling without making any effort, when it comes spontaneously, then that's a good sign your practice has been effective.
Kamanyita gomjabeta la mikwa de soso dyla ta simje tamje da ro namji tadani be simje de lo chaganyi samlo tamo dona tanda ta chu choma de soso dungali na de simje de soso dyla yoba chero ta dizola kanye shibo be mikwa samlo tang ta digi tenda de nya maduna ta ne chechaba de tawani de digmendo nya milele ba de digmendo sine samlo khonala la mikwa de de chibo ba sine ro.
So when we do the meditation, we can visualize sentient beings in front of us. If you're not able to visualize a lot of them, at least you visualize a few, maybe 10 people, and seeing them in suffering, and seeing them, in suffering, and that you wanted to help them to really liberate from this suffering. So that's what we're going to meditate. And the important thing here is that I will be the primary responsibility. I will take the primary responsibility to help them get the liberation. So that commitment coming from your side, and this is very important.
Okay, then we will have the 2-minute meditation. Also, Alan, please careful going to fall. I'm sorry. 어디에서 다 되는 것도 다 이제 내가 둔지는 다 천소디 되는 로로 저거지 되는다 천소 다 용원기 참바스네로 다 디젤라 시바디 용원기 참바 임바래 다 용원기 참바스네 배나 천소다 용원기 참바디 다 인제기 단다 균제 명아 둔지 인지에 유라도 해서로 아니
천소다
용원기 참바니보디 아니 인제에 유라도 로 인제디 겨와라 천소다 용원기 참바디 뭐도 마소나 단단가서 균제 명아 둔지 인제디 루투 해서마래 로 이나 인제라 진짜 보고를 besana 보고 말해 간세나 년태다 년랑이 줄라 인제 여승거로 여승거로 이나야 탄다 균제 명아 둔지 인제디 년태다 랑게라 요말해 어때인자 탄다 요한기 참바다 탄다 천소다 요한기 참바니보디 인제 집에 뭐라 인지미시 도고니 대인상 다 천소체 디젤라 요한기 참바다 다 요한기 참바 수행데 지단이 참바다 요한기 참바니라 다 개발 첨부였어요 참바가니데 다 퇴진되는다 망초와 되나라다 보유다 되게 가도도 시작 통만요다 맞어데 웨스턴 나라다 칼라자 납치비 개합나라다 맞어 키다 심해도들 참부 쉬워지기도 할라 다디도 참바디 말라 다 요한기 참바라니데 야 단다 키다 심해도들 참부 세바다 만다와 그러와 소소게 빼나 미산딜라 부직리 매와이바이나 다 부치부들라다 파마 빠바이네 아마이네 소소게 속도네 부들라 시고디치기도 왔으니라 코라마도 매바인도 코라마가니까 로송 가랬던 거니 가르치고 있는다 로종토라 가래이나지 치고 참부치로 지야모 맞으서가나 아직 가래를 채용 가래를 심리 시고치는 디치기도 왔으니 다디 영원히 참바인 말 우리가 대대송다 로와심제 탐쟁이야 대단 삼로 땅이 딱 말로나 패진치 보이니 다 진소월에 진소와데 소소라니 소소라다 부구직레 마도 매바나시로 부구직 마도 매바나 심제 탐제 다가레세 삼로 디레타네다 그러다 이동와 이동묘에 많이 봐죠 이동와 가신 도시면에 바랑랑 쉬주기다 그러다 이 삼로지 딘데 코르토바 임바이나테네 이원지 차바 두고요서래
So having generated this repaying kindness to sentient beings. The next one is generating the loving compassion. In Tibet, Yung Champa in Tibetan, loving compassion. And so compassion and the loving compassion is slightly different. Compassion, like even some of the lower, vehicles, the hearers, Nyantu, and the self-liberators, they also have compassion. But what is the loving compassion is slightly different. Because compassion we can also, in the West, you see it's wonderful that a lot of us are keeping pets. We're showing great love toward our pets, cats and dogs. That's a compassion. But it's not a loving compassion. The loving compassion in this context is just like a only child, a strong feeling from parents, especially from a mother, toward the only child. And for example, when you have only one child, the parents will do anything for this child in terms of spending a lot of money on his or her education. When the only child is suffering from illness, the parents take great care and have this very strong feeling that the child will be well soon. And so this is like a better example of loving compassion. And so what we are advised here is we have this kind of a feeling toward all sentient beings. That because knowing their kindness to us, that we have a loving compassion to all the sentient beings, like a mother has a loving compassion toward her only child. And so what is this loving? It's like this delightfulness and this really joyfulness in seeing and helping the other person. By doing so, you get this natural joy out of you, and that's what we call the loving compassion.
Tende sonza tanda ima tanda lamrim nala jemanyo tanda pabonga desinimwe zebe tanda namdo lajen nala pedede shabwa tanda pena gishi podobe kundela ta moje ngoji ta yongi chambala na kandere sene pa kandi shube kabla ani gishi podobe ani kerangi koran puji tsendi kare na teboye na jiksungwa keran pujigle madome doa sene 아니 그냥 보디라 그냥 세와 가지고 두고 뭐 디데지 그냥 세와다 가지고 두고 뭐 디삼로 가지고 두고 어디 용안지 참바래 했으니 기시포도에 마티리 갈렌남도 와서네로 약간 디시디 용안지 참발한다 간데 약간 디시베 칼라 그냥 부지 모두 민도 왔다 디라 그냥 세와 가지고 두고도 야마 그냥 코란지 돌아 가지고 디치기도 어디 삼로 걸바디 용안지 참바래 했으니 뭐 디데지 걸바 레와 임바이나 아니 예완이 참바라니 루바레 아니 코란 불러들 얘기는 로아심제 탐자를 딘데 로질려고 했으니 딘데 가둘려고 했나다 윤정명아 되기 나는다 예완이 참바디다 문도 줄바레 했으니
In the Lamrim text, especially I've seen this on Geshe Pabonka's the liberation in our hand. I haven't seen this in the root text, but I've seen this Pabonka, which is commentary. He referred to the great Kadamba Geshe Potowa's story. A lady went to ask a question to Geshe Potowa, and she asked, "What is loving compassion?" And then Geshe Potowa, I think the lady's name is Tewa. Then Geshe Potowa said, "Do you have a son?" And she said, "Yes, I have only one son and one child." And what's his name? And his name is Tewa. And then Geshe Potowa said, "How much you love him? Or do you love him a lot?" And she said, "Very much so." And then he said, "That's loving called compassion. The way you love to the son is the loving compassion, and now you have to extend this to all sentient beings. And that's the loving compassion we are talking in the instruction here. And so by the time you have this incredible loving compassion to all the sentient beings, then this is a sign that your practice is you're realizing this goal of your practice.
Today sonza yewangi chamba dutan de la na soso mizan de la puchile moto medi ani soso pudi la tosun shuchumbo shutan ro pudi kare labna ta kare yogo labna mi kare chiwa labna chi to dinde chindi ya kashi putola dni dinde doa sinero ta dinde yutune cheba ina yewangi chamba di norware sinero ta pudi lamone yende yutune ta chunjune sugyen cheware chembo seware Geshe shemato Geshe pala ani migembala kushachena dindo yalla ani yunde yutone ya di cheto bayina ta yuanyi chamba ta pudila ta chekyoncheni yuanyi chaba de duware yesinero ta muy dozon tamba di duwa kyanye ngondo pudi kare labayina ta chebayina pugu misete dozan tuwa duwara wasini otedan chigba rowasimse tamjela ta 내가 umuida dezogyongi de khazanyije de cheba yimbayina ta yuanji chambadi dumatuware ta khandeshi worsana yidongwa ase dwadi nge machibayina tawanyine digimindu senero puchigle madu mebalna shira inde samlo tani ta tabdu yeta zubesanye kumala tiye tabdi narana jigi insini di cheba yimbayina ta dine loji lebayidi ta yuanji chambala yita yidongwa me nama ta rana shushu gawa tarawa 소소기다 내가 집에 가서 소소라 가신 도시 여행에 칼림도 왔으니라 얘네한테 최소를 제발이나 칼리시고도 되나시 로아디에다 된 제발라야다 가신 도시문에 디 제발내나 다 이원 가둘려봐나 가신 도시 차고 있어야 되고 한테라다 잠발라니를 뒤로 가도 요한이 잠발라니 대화를 거버대고 그러와 잠바다 니지 제발샤인디 로아심제던데 대화라 대화다 텐데 somebody chambare doa yuanji chamba kobar tewadi ndi wadila tanda hasamli ko tagda dewa chai ngoro an dewa la kobar doadi yuanji chamba che ani dungal de tewar doadi ani ninje doa sini Tenza, Yongi Chambada, Ninja Kewala, Yongi Chamba Mundo Matuna, Taniji Kesam Doas, you do not think it now, what it is. Tenza also, Semeshi doing the Semsetam de Dewada, the Yuju, the Demo Kushisundi, Chamba Semesumotola. And Semsetam de Duma, the way you use the tower using easy Semesumotola, and Opani on that Ali to
So when you have this only child, and you also have a strong loving compassion toward this child, but if you spoil the child by doing whatever the child asks you to do, by kind of washing him with the gifts and without thinking about the long-term benefit, then your loving compassion toward the child, it becomes cause for him to suffer. Your loving compassion really becomes this problematic, even like a factor in his unhappiness. And likewise, when we have this loving compassion toward all sentient beings, we have to look at the ultimate, if you like, goals of getting them happiness, but not kind of short term. Because if we do just engage in the short term benefiting them, like a loving parent spoiling the child, we could also harm the sentient being. And for that reason, we have to look at the ultimate benefit that we can render toward the sentient beings. And so by practicing this loving compassion, and you get this natural joy of really helping the sentient beings. When you engage in the practices, when you engage helping the sentient beings, you do not get any kind of a frustration, but rather this natural joy and pleasantness. And that's how a loving compassion is generated. And so the compassion, the feeling compassion is generally our desire for others to be happy. That's, I think, the feeling of compassion. And the loving, this is the engine of the truth. I have a problem differentiating this in English, but I'm using as much as I can on the Cambridge book, the term here. Loving, I think love is more like the love, or the loving compassion is the desire for the sentient beings to be happy. And then you have for immeasurables, you have this nyingji, karuna in Sanskrit. But in English, sometimes they translate compassion.
Great compassion.
Great compassion.
Right?
Yes. So the difference is karuna, I think, in a sense. It's like your desire is for the sentient beings to overcome suffering. You see the sentient beings are suffering, and that you really have the strong urge to help them come, above the suffering. That's great compassion. And so, but in order to get the great compassion, the karuna, you first have to have a loving compassion. And that's where when we do the immeasurable, for immeasurables, the prayer for that, first we say, may all sentient beings be happy. And then followed by may all sentient beings, be devoid of suffering. So really, to have the great compassion, first you have to generate loving compassion. So again, in this context too, first we are practicing loving compassion, and then we will do practicing the great compassion. So they're almost like a cause and a result in some sense.
This one's on Gunjamanga doing guitar, Ninja Chimbo di Kevala, and Yongi Chambamundo Masona, Sawan Dicta Nevares, Tinza, Poju di Dungan de Chawar Duba di Narana Chi, like Lodi Kevala, Marilla. Lodi Kevala, Poju di Devala Kuji, like the Koba di Narana Chi, Lodi Mundo Masona, Kodunga the Tower di Lodi, the action in the Doha. 디제 송장 아니 균드 메마 둔주고네 파팡림 샤드에 마르시에 틴소 요니 차마 닝제 라송 자주기 셈셈에 샤워레 센로 아니 마도 세메시바 딱칼로 삼로 타임에 차바 세메 테네 닝제 세메테 다가게 도와 세메 그 균드기 고진디 사레 세
So here, rightly so, that it calls the cause and effect instruction, the 7-point cause and effect instruction. Why is cause and effect? Everything that you do is kind of resulting the next step. And here we practice loving compassion first, and followed by practicing great compassion. So there is this cause and effect relationship, and this is very important. And we see the same, almost like a cause and effect, when we do the 4 immeasurable prayers. May all sentient beings be happy, and then may all sentient beings, overcome from suffering, so on. And this is how they ordered. And here, if you look at it from the step 1, recognizing all sentient beings as our mothers in our previous life, until this extraordinary compassion. These 7 steps are gradual steps, that one is leading to the next one, and that one's also leading to the next step. So that relationship is there, and it's important for us to recognize that. We will have a 5 minutes break.
I hope please really stop here 10, 15 or 20 minutes with question answer time. Please more question ask me, please.
Does Geshe know that there's an acting class and it's not?
Yes.
I like